With those very few comments, then, Speaker, I again emphasize that it's good legislation, and I do thank you for your patience. Thank you.
If I recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate. The Honourable, the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
I would like, Mr. Speaker, to thank the colleagues in the legislature who support this legislation. We believe it's good for the future of the HRM, and not only that, it's needed. And Mr. Speaker, with those few comments, I would like to close debate on second reading of Bill number 181 and ask you to call for the question.
Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour signify by saying aye. Against? Motion is carried. Order that this bill be sent to the Committee on Law Amendments.
Bill number 181, an act to implement HRM by design.
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that you call Bill number 186, the Animal Protection Act, which was adjourned by the Honourable Member for Pictou West the last time.
The Bill 186, the Animal Protection Act. The Honourable, the Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess as I was saying before the interruption, I'm certainly an animal lover, and I certainly am welcome this particular bill that's before us here in the legislature at this time. And certainly my wife and I are both animal lovers, as I'm sure many of the members in this chamber are also, in that we have some pets at home. We have a dog and 2 cats. The dog, Mr. Speaker, just happens to be the official dog of the province of Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Duck Tolling Retriever. She's 11 and a half years old and a fine pet, certainly good with children, good on the property to let us know if anything's going on. And 2 cats, an indoor cat and an outdoor cat. So I'm, like many of the members here in this House, an animal lover and glad to be. But certainly it's a responsibility being a pet owner, and you know, it's certainly costly to make sure they have all their needles and are looked after on an annual or semi-annual basis for the different needs that they have. But I suppose, Mr. Speaker, my love for animals probably started with my growing up on a family farm in Pictou County, and certainly we had a mixed menagerie there of livestock, from milk cows and beef cows, pigs, chickens, pony, horses, even a goat and a rabbit or 2. So we had quite a variety of animal species on the farm, and certainly maybe that's where my love of animals has come from. But so I think we're all animal lovers here in this House, but I do know that sometimes there's problems when animals are abused. And unfortunately, those have been some high-profile cases in the media when people abuse their pets, or the example from was in the news not too long ago of a number of cats and dogs from in care in this province that were considerably abused, and occasionally even on farms there's reports of livestock that are mishandled, and none of us like to hear or see those stories. So this legislation, Mr. Chair or Mr. Speaker, I think is good. Bill 186. It will help to bring some protection for animals, whether they be pets or whether they be livestock on farms. Now, I did mention the other day, Mr. Speaker, that in my riding in Pictou West, there is a group there called the Earth Ark Animal Rescue Center, and they've been very good. They had an open house there on the Open House Farm Day in September, and actually, Mr. Speaker, they have an open house there almost every Sunday that people can drop by and see the horses and the geese and the goats and so on that are there, that are in care, that are being well looked after. These are rescue animals for primarily, mostly horses or ponies that would have otherwise met another fate, but that people have brought in and are being well taken care of there by the Animal Rescue Center. And I did note in the bill, Mr. Speaker, that there is a provision for a chief inspector to have the authority to investigate complaints around the province when there are problems with abuse of animals. And this chief inspector has the authority, has the jurisdiction to set up peace officers or special constables to go out and investigate a case of abuse. And that is good. That jurisdiction previously, I guess it had been under the SPCA, and it's now, I guess, rolled into the under the authority of the Department of Agriculture through this legislation. But my suggestion, as I'd previously brought forward, Mr. Speaker, was that groups and organizations that are looking after animals, that have a real love for animals and know animals, these are the people with expertise, and some of these individuals should be drawn upon and asked to perhaps help investigate and when there is a suspected case of animal abuse. And I would say EarthArc is one of those groups with people in as volunteers that have that knowledge, that have that expertise, and could well be special constables or peace officers, you know, to go out and investigate at the time. I mentioned Betty Schneider as the organizer and as the founder of EarthArc would be a good person to draw upon for her expertise. Wendy Gillis is a volunteer with that group. I think I mispronounced her name the other day, but Wendy and her husband are certainly dedicated animal lovers and are working hard to protect the horses and other livestock at EarthArc. Joe Vincent is another community volunteer that I believe would be a person that would have the knowledge and expertise to investigate complaints in the community. So I would hope, Mr. Speaker, that the minister, through his department, in setting up the regulations for this legislation, would allow people with expertise that are animal lovers that could be called upon from time to time to, in their role as an animal investigator, and see if there is a case of suspected abuse or not. So briefly, Mr. Speaker, that's really the main point I want to make, that is to use the community resources of people that are in the area that have knowledge of animals and how they should be properly cared for. They're setting the example. They're watching carefully on a daily or weekly basis over animals, and they are the ones that could investigate any abuse cases that might be in the local community. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I do think the bill is an important step. I think it's going in a positive direction, and I certainly would like to see it move forward past second reading and towards the law amendment stage. And I would look forward to what other members of the House here may have to say on this particular bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise today on Bill 186. It's entitled An Act to Protect Animals and to Aid Animals That Are in Distress. And this act, Mr. Speaker, will replace the Animal Cruelty Prevention Act, which has previously been the rule around these kind of issues to protect animals. And Mr. Speaker, my interest in this has gone back really to the time when I became an MLA. I have had emails from people whenever there's an event in the city where there's been anything publicized about cruelty to animals. I can tell you without a doubt this touches a chord with people, and I have had many very emotional emails from people asking why we don't have stronger repercussions when there is something like this, why it isn't treated more seriously, why the perpetrators aren't punished more severely. And it seems that the current rules have been too lax, and they would like to see more done. And it is interesting just how much it affects people and how moved they are by acts of animal cruelty. And that applies whether it's cruelty on farms or cruelty in the case of domestic animals. And it's certainly something, Mr. Speaker, that I feel that we have to be very firm with Other provinces have been bringing in new legislation in the last couple of years. The one that I'd read most recently was Ontario, who brought in quite an extensive list of changes and have gone a long way to tightening up their rules and to increasing the penalties for any sort of animal cruelty. And they've also, Mr. Speaker, given further powers to their officers who can investigate cases of animal cruelty. And that's something that I would like to see, Mr. Speaker, as we look at the contents of Bill 186, to see if, in fact, it has gone far enough on some of these aspects that I think we could learn from other provinces and their consultation and the work that they've done and what sort of suggestions they've brought back, because there's quite a few things still not addressed in this current bill. But to begin with, I would like to look at what's in the bill as it stands. And I think one positive thing is that the powers of the SPCA have been more clearly defined, and there is now a role as well for the Department of Agriculture as the cases of animal cruelty relate to farm animals and animals that are used in agriculture. And I think that will help, Mr. Speaker, because the understanding over the last number of years was that the SPCA, which is a volunteer organization, one that has members and one that's really a nonprofit organization, has had difficulty covering the mandate that they had, which was to cover all cases of animal cruelty. And I don't think that they were able to really do all that was being asked of them. This will help to clarify, because now the SPCA will have the responsibility for dealing with the cases of animal cruelty that arise around domestic animals, that are pets. And the Department of Agriculture will be responsible where those animals are farm animals. And I think that's going to help a lot with that division of duty. At the same time, both agencies, the Department of Agriculture and the SPCA, will now be required to have each one to have a chief inspector. And under that chief inspector, one would hope an army of other inspectors. I'm sure it'll just be a few other inspectors, but we need to make sure that they have a good number of staff to cover the complaints that arise under them. It's very clear that we need that. The question around the chief inspector, Mr. Speaker, is really whether or not the powers that that person has are going to be extensive enough. In other provinces, the inspectors, I think, are really regarded as peace officers, and they have the power in Ontario, for example, to enter buildings if they're investigating an issue of abuse or suspected abuse. And they're able to go in and actually see where the animals are held and examine the conditions in which the animals are living. In our act that's before us now, this Bill 186, that isn't a possibility. The Act does extend their powers so that they can do something they haven't done before, which is, Mr. Speaker, to ask that the animals be brought out. And people, if they are asked by one of these inspectors to bring their animals out for the inspector to have a look at, they are required now by law. If this were to pass, they would be required by law to cooperate and bring their animals forth. But, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot that an inspector could learn by seeing the conditions in which the animals are kept. And the question of abuse, should really cover aspects of the condition where they're living, and that would be issues of ventilation, of proper feeding, of being given veterinarian care when it's required, to specify those conditions that we would consider abusive. If they're not getting the proper vet care when they need it, then that is a question of abuse. And Mr. Speaker, there's nothing in this Act that's speaking to pet stores. And that's an issue that has been raised in HRM in the last number of years. A couple of times there's been some attention around the pet stores and the condition of the animals that are in the store. One in particular, Mr. Speaker, that I read a resolution about here in the House. It had attracted the attention of quite a few people in HRM. They had gone and actually protested outside one of the stores because the animals were not being walked at all. You had little puppies that were in there for 3 and 4 months waiting to find a home, and they weren't being moved from the cages that they were in, scarcely ever taken out or walked. And in fact, one person bought one little puppy that was at the heart of that story that was in the press, and found that the legs and hips and so on were not well developed, that they actually had some medical problems as a result of being so small and being left in one cage for that many weeks. In fact, months. And so this has it causes a lot of damage and suffering to the animal, and it doesn't socialize the animal, and it's not the right condition in which to be selling puppies to become someone's pet. And so we believe that there should be something further in this act or in another act that would address the conditions in which animals are kept for sale. And again, Mr. Speaker, there's no mention of puppy mills in this act. And just for the benefit of the House, I have done some research on puppy mills, and it's not something we used to hear of in the past. In fact, most of these sort of operations where people were just breeding animals purely for profit and not taking good care of them, most of them had been centered in the U.S., Mr. Speaker. And in 1995, Agriculture Canada began regulating puppy imports from the United States. And precisely because of the fact that so many of these animals were sick, had diseases, and were unwell because of the close contact and unhygienic conditions in which they were being kept. And so in 1995, Agriculture Canada nationally began to regulate imports from the U.S., and this caused an increase in demand in Canada and led to puppy mills, an increase in the number of puppy mills here in our own country. And we've had cases right here in Nova Scotia that are before the courts even now about, conditions that are really inhumane. They are cruel, and they are unacceptable in our province. And I know that the people who live in my riding and in all of the ridings in this province, speak up when they hear of this. It affects them very deeply, and they would like to see stronger penalties. I can't stress that enough. In fact, Mr. Speaker, I often wonder why we deal with this particular act under the Department of Agriculture. Really, it should be a justice issue. I think there's an argument to be made that it be treated as a justice issue, because people feel this is not something about your property. This is something about what is just and what is right. So it's something that we should really be looking at. What's happening, as I say, with these puppy mills is that animals are kept in inhumane conditions. In fact, in the Ontario SPCA, they describe the puppy mills to be a breeding operation in which dogs are repeatedly bred for financial gain and are kept in substandard conditions. And that's very important, Mr. Speaker. It's the substandard conditions that we are looking at. It's where the female dogs are being bred with no care or concern for their health, bred twice a year and just put down when they can no longer have litters of puppies. That's inhumane, Mr. Speaker, and the little puppies are not being kept in proper conditions. So we're not talking here about ethical breeders and about the many dog lovers in this province that take good care of their animals and as I say, register them with the appropriate bodies and really value them and care for them properly. This is not who we're talking about. We're talking about people who are simply breeding animals for financial gain with no care or concern for their health. And we heard just recently about people buying a puppy over the internet through the Kijiji site, and in fact, when they had received the animal, within a day that puppy died because it had a disease that they had received, prior to being sold. So there's no control over the health and care and condition of those animals, and we believe that there have to be some more and some further reference to that, as I said, either in this bill or perhaps in a companion bill that might come along. But it's very important as a province that we take this opportunity with the new bill before us to consider whether or not we want to have these conditions going unmentioned in the legislation that we have as a province, because other provinces have taken steps, Mr. Speaker, to directly identify these. Again, I wanted to go back to the fact that I think the inspectors should have the power to remove animals if they're in distress or if they suspect that they may be harmed. That is very important, that power be included in the inspector's powers, because asking for the animal to come out is not really sufficient. Even though it's a step ahead of where we are today, we don't believe that it does answer the question before us. So I would like to make sure that is something that we look at, and I think it would really be calling them peace officers, giving them the powers of peace officers. Mr. Speaker, there's also an issue around animal fighting and the use of animals in fights, I suppose for gambling purposes. And that is something we don't talk about very often either, but it does exist in this province, as it does right across the country and in other countries. And I think that we should be looking at that and considering whether that is not something that should also be specifically mentioned in the bill as we talk about what is humane and what is right. Clearly, that is not right to be putting animals in harm's way and for amusement at any time. So that's very important, and I do think that there is more to be said about that, but I wanted to simply touch on it today. I'd like to see an emphasis again on the sale and on the breeding of animals so that we can look at what the standards of care are as we go forward, so we can spell out the standards of care in animal breeding and animal ownership. Mr. Speaker, there's also a question of animals that are used in law enforcement, and I think that they should also be named in a bill and that there should be specific penalties for any harm that is caused to those animals. It's usually, we might be talking about dogs as a rule, but any animals that the police have or the law enforcement officials have. And I think that it's important that we step into that realm as well. Mr. Speaker, some of the penalties need to be looked at, and I don't believe in this act it's mentioning any lifetime ban on ownership of a domestic animal or ownership of an animal in future if you've had a number of repeated offenses. And that is something that, again, Ontario and I believe British Columbia have in their act, that you can actually insist that there be a lifetime ban on owning an animal. And that would be something I think much more effective, particularly if we're talking about puppy mills and a repeated offense under that legislation that I would like to see. So I think we need to look at that and try and increase the fines and even have jail time as well if the fines aren't sufficient. And so, Mr. Speaker, I do think lifetime ban should be included in that as part of the hierarchy of penalties as the first, second, and third offense come forward, because this is something, and I think it's important that we mention it, and perhaps others will do the same, but when people are guilty of harming animals, there's a strong correlation, especially when it's young people involved, that this moves on and they also harm people. It's a lack of care and concern for life. And if they're willing to harm an animal, it is certainly in that spectrum of crime where they will move on and also harm people, harm children, harm others in their community. And I think that's one reason why we have to take this extremely seriously, Mr. Speaker, and make sure that we do all in our power to protect animals. Traditionally, the laws that guide animals had treated animals as property, and they were not really regarded as life or as beings that could suffer. That has changed over time, and I know that the laws in the last 100 years have changed to reflect that, but we still have a way to go, and I think that that's where this bill and this opportunity for us to discuss it is the chance for us to say, these are not just property. You don't just own an animal and therefore can do whatever you want with that animal. We used to talk that way about people and their children, that there was no onus to report abuse to children because people felt that was a domestic matter. Well, it isn't a domestic matter. It concerns all of us, obviously, in society. Laws say now that you have to report that kind of abuse if you know of any abuse to children. And this bill will introduce the obligation now for veterinarians, if they're aware of abuse, to raise that and to bring it forward. And I believe in it should protect them from any liability from having done so, because that may have prevented them in the past, that they perhaps could be sued by the person they have reported. That's not the case now. If this bill goes forward, we'll have an onus on veterinarians to report any abuse that they see, and I think that has received strong endorsement from veterinarians. They would like to see that in place because they will and do the right thing. They don't want to ever see cases of abuse that are in any way condoned. So again, one of the big things I'd like to see is the ability for us to see where animals are kept and the conditions that they are being kept in. That's very important. There's a need for good definitions on the standards of care, and I felt that was missing in this bill as well. That is exactly how do we expect animals to be maintained, And that could cover in some other acts in other provinces does cover things like the standards of design, construction, and maintenance of facilities in which animals are to be maintained. That's been spelled out in other acts and not in this act. So I think that's very important that we do that. Mr. Speaker, in speaking about the SPCA, there's a couple of new things that have been added into this act that will relate to the SPCA. And I think it's important that we note that there's been some controversy around the way the SPCA has managed its affairs. Not so much in its investigation. I think within the acts they've done their best, but even in terms of their governance. Last year's annual general meeting, people were excluded from attending that meeting unless they were current members. And this bill has actually addressed that and now says that their meetings must be open to the public. And I think that's a recognition that there have been difficulties with the SPCA and the way that they have conducted their affairs, really. And a second part of this gives the Minister of Agriculture the authority to revoke their powers if he's not satisfied, if the minister is not satisfied with the way that they are conducting their reviews and their inspections and even their affairs. But I think the fact that the meetings must be open now to the public is very significant, because it was an embarrassment really last year to see that they had some internal disputes and were not being open in public about them. So that will be something much better. There's also an annual report to the Department of Agriculture that the SPCA will be required to provide, and I think that's very important. As you know, Mr. Speaker, I'm very interested in accountability. That's a big concern of not only myself but the Liberal caucus, that we have better accountability in all of our systems. We certainly think that that's an important factor. You can't give carte blanche a lot of authority to a body like the SPCA and not have the checks and balances built in. That's what's going to ensure that we get good value for our money, that the animals in this province are going to be properly protected, and that the organization is going to be able to do its work properly. There has to be oversight, Mr. Speaker. Time and again, we don't have that kind of oversight. We, as you know, I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, and we hear from the Auditor General about reviews of various programs and departments where the accountability has been lax. And the government has allowed programs to run and operate without anybody really asking the tough questions and having some accountability mechanism back. So it's time that we made sure every act has that in place. And here we do see it in this act covering the SPCA. So that it says the minister can actually revoke the SPCA's power if they fail to do their work. And so we really do support that. That's very important, especially given the news that we've had around the SPCA in just the very, very recent months. There's also a provision here to include an animal cruelty appeal board, which is something new for us, and that would hear appeals about animal seizures. So whenever somebody whenever the SPCA has seized an animal, if the owner has the wish to appeal that, they have an independent body to go to and have that appeal heard. And that is important in case there are misunderstandings, but I think that appeal board has to be well prepared and well instructed so that they actually are knowledgeable. We can't have them be just unprepared in terms of what their duties are. So that's very important as well, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think the time is getting a little late this afternoon, so perhaps I will adjourn debate for today and we can resume at another time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor to adjourn debate, please say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carried. The chair recognizes the Honourable the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the government's business for today, and I would ask that you call upon the Honourable House Leader for the Liberal Party for opposition business for tomorrow.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the Honourable the House Leader for the Liberal Party.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the House tomorrow will sit from 2 p.m. until 6 p.m. and following the daily routine, we'll be calling resolution number 4510, which is a resolution dealing with the economy, and also resolution 4628. And in regards to 4628, I would ask for unanimous consent if we put it on the order paper, or we table the resolution today.
Okay, we're asking for unanimous consent to debate resolution 4628. Ready for the question? Question. All those in favor of the question, please say aye. Aye. Against? Motion carried. the Honourable, the Leader of the House Leader of the Liberal Party.
I was just going to adjourn. I move the House do now adjourn
Okay.
until tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you.
Okay. So the question before the House is for the House to adjourn and meet again at the hour of 2 p.m. tomorrow. Is it agreed? Agreed. So the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon. Thank you.